The first thing Althea noticed about the canyon was the smell. Not the heat, not the red rock, not the ache in her feet, where the leather of her boots had worn through and dried blood had glued the scraps to her socks. Those things had become too familiar to surprise her. She had been walking through the Arizona country since before moonset, keeping one hand wrapped around the walnut stock of a Winchester 1873, and the other pressed against the stitch in her side. It was the smell that stopped her. Creosote, sharp and clean, almost medicinal after miles of dust, horse sweat, old smoke, and the sour fear that seemed to have worked itself into her skin. She stood at the mouth of the box canyon and listened. Nothing moved. A fly worried at the corner of her mouth. Somewhere high in the rocks, a pebble clicked once and went still. The canyon walls rose on both sides in red and brown shelves, narrowing the sky to a hard strip of blue. In the shade below the western wall, there was a cabin built of stone and heavy timber, a lean-to, a corral, 2 water barrels, a stack of split juniper laid so straight it could have been measured with string, and a man sitting on a low basalt shelf with a rifle across his knees. Althea brought up the Winchester. The man did not move. He was older than she had first thought, his hair streaked with gray, his buckskin shirt faded almost the same color as the stone behind him. His face gave away nothing. He watched the rifle, then her hands, then the ruined boots, then the way she favored her left leg. Althea kept the barrel on his chest. "Water," she said. Her voice sounded scraped raw. He glanced toward the barrels beside the cabin. "Put the rifle down." "No." He looked back at her. Althea waited for the familiar change in a man's face, the narrowing calculation, the annoyance that a woman had refused him, the little shift that came just before a hand moved toward a gun or belt or rope. It never came. Instead, he said, "Then keep it. But if you faint, do not shoot me on the way down." She almost laughed. The sound got stuck somewhere behind her ribs. The man rose slowly. He was broad through the shoulders, lean everywhere else, carrying the weathered stillness of someone who had spent more nights outdoors than under a roof. He walked to the nearest barrel, dipped a tin cup, and set it on a flat rock halfway between them. Then he stepped back. Althea stared at the cup. "You first." He bent, picked it up, drank one swallow, put it back. Only then did she cross the distance. The water was cool enough to hurt her teeth. She wanted to empty the cup in 3 gulps, but old habit stopped her. The men in Gideon Black's camps had taught her what happened when a body went too long without water, and then got greedy. She wet her mouth, waited, swallowed, waited again. When she finally looked up, the man was watching the northern ridge rather than her. "You have horses?" she asked. "1. I need it. No, I can pay." "With what?" Althea looked down at herself. Dust-caked trousers, a torn shirt, cartridge belt, Winchester, nothing else worth naming. The man's gaze dropped to the rifle for half a second. She tightened her grip. "Not that. I did not ask." He turned toward the cabin. "Drink another cup. There is shade inside." Althea did not follow him until he had gone through the door and left it open. The cabin smelled of cedar, old coffee, gun oil, dry herbs, and something simmered too many times in a blackened pot. The floor was hard-packed earth, except for a patch of plank flooring beneath the bed and table. Narrow windows had shutters thick enough to stop more than weather. The door itself was reinforced with iron straps, a home built by a man who expected company and did not expect it to be friendly. Althea stood just inside the threshold. The man pointed to a stool. "Sit." She remained standing. He shrugged, poured water into a basin, and placed a folded rag beside it. "What is your name?" she asked. "Eskimensen." She waited for more. None came. "Eskimensen what?" He looked at her then, a faint, dry amusement passing through his eyes. "You plan to write me a letter?" That time a small sound did escape her, not laughter exactly, but close enough that it startled her. She lowered the Winchester a few inches. "Althea," she said. It was the name she had been using for 9 months, not the first name her father had given her, not the number Gideon Black had used. Something between those 2 lives. Something she had chosen because it belonged to no ledger she knew of. Eskimensen accepted it without asking whether it was true. That alone made her more suspicious of him. While he stepped outside to tend his horse, Althea searched the room with her eyes. 1 door, 2 narrow windows, a loft accessible by ladder, food stores under a canvas cover, a small chest near the hearth, rifle rack, knife on the table, no shackles, no spare rope inside, no woman's clothing, no photographs. She reached beneath her waistband and pulled out a tarnished silver locket. The oval case was dented along one edge, the little bird engraved on the front almost worn away. She had carried it through mud, camps, a river crossing, 1 beating, 2 theft attempts, and 3 days of walking with no horse. The hinge had jammed weeks ago. She no longer remembered whether that made it safer or sadder. A floorboard beside the bed shifted when she put weight on it. Althia crouched. With the knife from the table, she worked the plank up just enough to reveal dry dirt and spiderwebs. She wrapped the locket in a scrap of cloth and pushed it into the hollow. She had just pressed the board back when the door opened. Eskiminsen came in carrying a bundle of creosote branches. He saw the knife in her hand, the dirt on her fingers. The slight unevenness in the dust near the bed. He said nothing. He set the branches by the hearth and nodded toward the open door. Come. Althia did not like being told to follow anyone. Still, she followed. Outside, the western wall had begun to shade the yard. Eskiminsen led her to a flat black rock near the edge of the clearing. 6 white stones rested on it in a rough circle. He adjusted 1 pebble with his thumb. What are those? She asked. Proof. Of what? That I am still paying attention. He pointed to the smallest stone. At noon its shadow touches that crack. Late afternoon it reaches the edge. If it moves before I move it, something larger than a bird crossed here. He showed her a strip of smooth dust between 2 bushes where tracks would hold, a bucket filled to the brim so water could be dipped without splashing. Firewood stacked low enough not to block sight toward the northern pass, a coil of dark horsehair tucked beneath a rail, a wedge driven under the corral gate so it would not creak in the night. These are chores, Althia said. Yes, you talk about them like fortifications. They are both. He picked up her Winchester, which she had leaned against the porch, and held it out to her. She took it quickly. A rifle is a promise, he said. If you neglect it, the promise is worthless. Whose promise? Yours. He moved on. Althia watched his back and understood something she had not expected to find in that quiet bowl of rock. Eskiminsen's peace was not innocence. It was maintenance. Every object had a place because he had already imagined the night when he might need it without light. Every path around the cabin was clear because he had considered where a man could hide. Every barrel, shutter, and pile of wood carried 2 purposes, one ordinary, one defensive. He had not escaped danger. He had built a life that made room for it without surrendering everything else. At dusk, he cooked salt pork with beans and handed her a tin plate without ceremony. Althia ate at the table while keeping 1 foot angled toward the door. Eskiminsen noticed. He noticed everything. Afterward, he cleaned his rifle under a lamp. He broke it down part by part, laid each piece on a square of buckskin, wiped carbon from the metal, oiled the moving surfaces, and put it back together. Althia sat across from him. Why live here? She asked. He worked the cloth through the receiver. You already saw why. I saw traps disguised as chores. Good. You could work as a scout, guide caravans, hunt bounties. There are towns where a man with your skills could make money. Eskiminsen's hand stopped. Only for a moment. Then he set the rifle barrel on the table between them. Towns have laws written on paper, he said. Out here, the law is what a man can protect without becoming the thing he hates. Althia looked at him carefully. That sounds like something learned the expensive way. It was. The fire popped. She looked toward the door. Eskiminsen's eyes followed the movement, then returned to her face. No one can hurt you here, he said. The words were so plain she almost rejected them on instinct. No flourish. No promise of forever. No demand that she trust him. He said it the way he might say the spring had water or the northern trail was washed out. Althia felt anger before relief. You don't know who is coming. No. You don't know what I did. No. You don't know what they want. I know enough. What? Eskiminsen looked at the bruises fading around her wrists, that you were running from men, not justice. Althia stared at him. He picked up the next piece of the rifle. She slept badly that night. For the first hour she lay on the bed fully dressed, boots on, Winchester within reach. Then she moved to the floor, because the mattress felt too soft. Later she woke with her hand clamped over her mouth to keep from screaming, and found the cabin dark except for moonlight at the shutter edges. Eskiminsen was not inside. She sat up listening. A soft scrape came from the porch. Althia took the rifle and approached the door. Through a narrow gap she saw him sitting with his back against a post, facing the ridge, not asleep. Not guarding her exactly, guarding the valley. In the morning he gave her work, not kindness. Work. A torn grain sack needed mending. A fence rail had split. The water barrels needed scrubbing. Beans had to be sorted. A saddle strap required stitching. By the second day her palms had opened in 2 places and then hardened. By the fourth, she knew which board in the porch complained under weight and which one stayed silent. By the sixth, she could find the spring after sunset without a lamp. Eskiminson rarely praised her. He corrected with a look, a gesture, or one short sentence. Too loud. Wind is wrong. Watch the ridge, not me. Again, she preferred it to compliments. Compliments had always come with hands reaching for something. A week after she arrived, he took her to the lower wash and showed her the creosote perimeter. At first, Althia saw only brush. Then he crouched and lifted a strand of black horsehair almost invisible against the shadowed ground. Small hollow bones hung from another line several yards away. Not charms, he explained. Alarms. The bones made a dry clicking sound when moved in ways the wind would not usually move them. He showed her shallow pits hidden beneath brittle brush, deep enough to ruin a horse's stride, not deep enough to kill one unless a rider forced the issue. He showed her soft patches of dust preserved under overhangs specifically to hold tracks. He showed her two narrow paths through the perimeter that would remain safe if she remembered the sequence of stones. You built all this alone? Yes. How long? Years. Who were you expecting? Anyone who believed distance made me easy. He handed her a length of braided horsehair. Fix that line. Althea stared at it. You're teaching me your defenses. Yes, why? Because you live inside them now. The statement landed heavier than he seemed to intend. That afternoon, he made her strip and clean the Winchester until she could do it without looking at every part. Then he had her grease the lever, loading gate, hammer, and pins until the action worked with a soft, controlled click. You listen to a gun before you trust it, he told her. She ran the lever again, smooth. Your father teach you? Althea froze. Eskiminson waited. Some. She looked at the rifle. My father owned this. Where is he? Dead, probably. Probably, he sold the ranch. Then he sold things that weren't his to sell. Eskiminson did not ask what she meant. She hated him a little for understanding. Later, when the sun sat low, he placed 3 prickly pear fruits on a fallen log 50 yards away. 3 shots, he said, waste of lead. Missing is more expensive. Althea raised the Winchester. Her first shot tore dirt 6 inches left of the fruit. Eskiminson said nothing. She worked the lever. The second shot clipped the cactus pad. He shifted his weight behind her. Stop fighting the rifle. I'm not. You are punishing it for what other men did with guns. She lowered the barrel. He met her glare without blinking. Breathe, he said. She hated him more. Then she breathed. The third fruit burst in purple pulp. Althea lowered the rifle slowly. Something in her chest loosened. Eskiminson picked up the 2 missed casings and handed them to her. For remembrance. She gave him a sharp look. He walked away before she could decide whether he was making fun of her. The days took on a shape. Work before heat. Rest at noon. Repairs when the western wall gave shade. Practice at dusk. Watch after dark. Althea learned that creosote smelled strongest before rain even when rain never came. She learned the spring drew mule deer just before sunrise. She learned to judge distance by the delay of echoes. She learned to set a pot on the stove without clanging iron against iron. She learned that Eskiminson drank coffee so dark it stained the tin mug brown, no matter how often it was. Scrubbed, she also learned he never sat with his back to the door. Not once. On the 12th day, she found out why. They had spent the morning hauling cedar posts to reinforce the corral. Near the spring, Eskiminson took off his shirt and knelt to wash the dust from his shoulders. Althea looked up from rinsing a cloth. Across his back were old scars, knife lines, bullet puckers, a long pale groove from shoulder to ribs, and below his left shoulder blade, a brand. Althea stopped breathing. The mark had spread with age. The scar tissue twisted and raised, but she knew the shape. A hooked bee inside a broken circle. Gideon Black's mark. Her hands went numb in the spring water. Eskiminson did not turn. How? She asked. He stayed silent long enough that she thought he might refuse. Then he said, I worked for him. The words were quiet. Althea stood. Her wet cloth fell onto the stones. You what? I tracked for him. She moved 1 step backward. The Winchester leaned against a cedar 10 feet away. Eskiminson heard the movement. I was younger. That changes nothing, no. He bought people. Yes, he sold people. Yes, you helped him find them. Eskiminson finally turned. There was no defense in his face. Yes, Althea wanted him to lie. Wanted him to offer an excuse she could tear apart. Wanted him to say he had infiltrated the gang or been forced at gunpoint. Instead, he picked up his shirt and held it in one hand. I thought I could use his money and information to keep other people alive, he said. Then I learned a man does not carry poison in his pocket without touching it. Althea's jaw tightened. What made you stop? A family in a dry wash near the border. Woman. 2 boys. An old man with 1 eye. Black wanted them because someone paid him. I found their trail, and I told Black the storm erased it. What happened? Eskiminson looked past her at the water. He knew. The brand on his back answered the rest. He told her only what was necessary. Black's men tied him to a wagon wheel before sunrise, heated the iron, branded him while the crew watched, then sold him south to a mine outfit that bought strong men cheaply and replaced them when they stopped being strong. 3 years underground. He escaped during a collapse that killed 5 men and buried the foreman waist-deep in rock. You could have killed Black afterward, Althia said. Yes, why didn't you? Eskiminson pulled on his shirt. Because killing him would not unmake what I had done. That's convenient. Yes, again, no defense. Althia hated that too. She retrieved the Winchester and walked back toward the cabin alone. For the rest of the day, she spoke only when work required it. At sunset, she found a cup of water beside the porch step where she sat mending a torn grain sack. Eskiminson did not sit beside her. He worked at the corral in silence. Althia watched his scarred hands move over leather and remembered the first day, when he had set water down halfway between them and stepped back. That night she lifted the loose floorboard and held the silver locket in her palm. She still could not open it. The metal reflected a warped piece of her face. For months she had measured men by whether they hurt her, wanted something from her, or looked away while someone else did. Eskiminson fit none of those categories cleanly. That frightened her more than if he had. The next morning she found him beside a shallow arroyo. He pointed to the sand. Track. Althia stared at him. After yesterday? Especially after yesterday. You think teaching me footprints fixes it? No. Then why are we here? Because Black is still alive. She looked at the faint marks in the sand. What am I looking at? Wait. He showed her a lizard's tail drag, the collapse of sand at a heel edge, the difference between a man moving confidently and one placing weight cautiously. He taught her to watch not just the mark, but what the mark had displaced. The ground does not care what a man says he is, Eskiminson told her. It records what he weighs. Althea crouched until her knees hurt. By midday, he sent her alone across nearly a mile of open basin. Reach the cabin without letting the ridge see you, he said, and leave no trail I can follow. She almost told him to go to hell. Instead, she studied the land, hard pan, wash, low scrub, wind shadow, soft silt, black rock. She moved when gusts stirred grass, walked on sun-baked clay where prints would not hold, crossed soft ground on the edges of her feet, using the wind-rippled sections where small disturbances vanished into existing texture, kept the Winchester low so the barrel could not flash sunlight. By the time she reached the porch, sweat soaked the back of her shirt. She pressed herself against the wall and waited. Nothing. Then Eskiminson stepped out from behind a rock 10 yards away. Althea jumped and nearly cursed. He looked at the path she had taken. Then he looked at her. For the first time she saw clear respect in his face. Tomorrow, he said, night. That evening, while they ate beans and bread, Althea asked, Do you regret it? Eskiminson knew what she meant. Yes, every day. She frowned. He tore bread in half. Some days I work. Althea thought about that for a long time. 3 nights later, peace ended. She was on the porch stitching a grain sack when Eskiminson stopped oiling a saddle near the corral. He became so still that the change drew her eye before any sound reached her. What? She whispered. He tilted his head, then he looked north. Althea followed his gaze. 5 riders stood on the ridge against the orange edge of sunset. No one moved. Her needle slipped and stabbed her thumb. A bead of blood swelled against the dust on her skin. She barely felt it. The lead rider sat a bay horse. Broad hat, dark coat, silver at the spur. Even at that distance she knew him. Gideon Black. The world around her seemed to lose sound. She could see the porch, the sack in her lap, Eskiminson near the corral, the line of riders above them. But all she heard was a voice from another year saying number 7 as if it were her name. Her first instinct humiliated her. She grabbed the Winchester and moved toward the woodpile. Hide it. Hide herself. Make the cabin look empty. Make the valley look unimportant. Make herself small enough to be overlooked. A rough hand closed around her wrist. Althea jerked hard. Eskiminson released her immediately, but stepped between her and the woodpile. Do not hide the iron. Her breath came too fast. They'll leave if they think. No, you don't know that. Yes. 5 men for 1 woman? Eskiminson took a brass spyglass from his vest and pressed it into her hand. Look, I know who they are. Look anyway. She raised the glass. The ridge snapped close. Gideon Black adjusted his saddle cinch with the same unhurried precision she remembered. Behind him were 4 men she had seen around his fires: Mercer with the crooked jaw, Tate, who liked to whistle while other people were afraid, a broad man named Cole who had once held her wrists while Black measured a chain. The 4th she knew only as Reese. Real men, not ghosts. That distinction mattered. She lowered the glass. They won't stop. No. If we stay inside, they burn it. If we ride south, they follow. If I go alone, Eskimensen's expression hardened. They follow you. Then they come back here because I helped. Althia closed her eyes. What do we do? Eskimensen looked toward the darkening pass. We make them pay for every step. He moved immediately. The next hour was labor, not panic. He armed the horsehair lines and bone alarms. Althia filled every bucket. They shifted ammunition from the chest to 3 defensive positions. He opened narrow firing ports in the shutters. She carried 2 iron plates up from the root cellar, salvaged from an ore wagon, and together they fixed them over the west-facing windows. The hammer blows sounded too loud. Eskimensen tapped a rhythm on the frame. 3 quick, pause 1, Althia understood. She struck in the pattern of a woodpecker that nested in the canyon. 3 blows, pause, 1. They worked until sweat ran into her eyes. The riders remained on the ridge, watching. After dark, fires appeared above them. 1, then 3, then 6, then more scattered across the rim. Althia counted 14 points of light. There are more men, she said. Eskimensen stood beside her at the narrow window. No. How do you know? Do not count the light. He pointed to the black gaps between fires. Count where stars disappear. Althia stared until her eyes watered. Then she saw it, a moving absence, a horse crossing a dark gap, another shape behind a fire, then nothing. 1 man is tending several, yes. They want us to think they brought reinforcements. They want you afraid of what you can see, so you miss what is moving where you cannot. She watched the dark instead of the flames. For the first time since Black appeared, her breathing slowed. Near midnight, hoofbeats approached from the southern trail. Althia swung the Winchester toward the door. Eskimensen held up 1 hand. A rider stopped 20 yards out. Naish, Eskimensen called softly. The man dismounted. Naish Ironhand was younger than Eskimensen, but carried the same economy of motion. His horse's hooves had been wrapped with burlap to soften tracks. A pack animal followed behind. Naish unloaded 2 small powder kegs. San Pedro Crossing, he said. 5 riders. No others. Black has boys riding east and west for supplies, but they are not here yet. He knows the canyon? Eskimensen asked. Knows enough to be dangerous, not enough to be comfortable. Naish refused water inside. He drank standing in shadow and kept his eyes on the ridge. Althia watched from the doorway. You staying? She asked. Naish looked at Eskimensen before answering. I will be where they do not look. Then he rode back into the dark. The gunpowder keg sat beside the wall like 2 quiet warnings. Althia touched her throat. A chill moved through her that had nothing to do with the night. She knew that chill. Fever. She crossed to the medicine chest and found the folded paper Dr. Julian Sterling had given her, after treating her outside a border town months earlier. His handwriting was tight and impatient. Quinine dose. Water. Watch pulse. Keep warm. Do not repeat early even if chills return. The note had no tenderness in it. She loved it for that. Sterling had treated her like a body worth keeping alive, not a tragedy and not a price. She swallowed the bitter powder with water. Eskimensen noticed her shaking. Fever? Yes. Bad? Not yet. He looked toward the ridge. Tell me when yet arrives. No pity. No fuss. Althia sat at the table and cleaned the Winchester again. The lever moved smooth under her hand. Outside, bone clicked once against bone. Both of them froze. Another rattle came from farther west. Not wind. Eskimensen extinguished the lamp. The cabin dropped into darkness. A rifle cracked from the ridge. The bullet struck the door at head height, punching splinters into the room. Althia stared at the pale wound in the timber. A second shot whistled over the roof. Eskimensen did not move toward the door. Testing, he said. The bone alarm sounded again. Closer. Althia worked the Winchester's lever.
Yeah.
The sound was soft, controlled, final. She moved to the firing slit. The siege had begun. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. That was worse than gunfire. Althia crouched behind the iron-plated window and listened to the fever moving inside her body. Her teeth wanted to chatter. She locked her jaw. Sweat cooled between her shoulder blades even though the room had gone cold. Eskimensen knelt beside the rear wall, 1 hand resting on the floor. What are you doing? She whispered. Feeling horses. She almost asked whether he could really feel hoofbeats through packed earth and stone, But then a faint vibration came through her boot sole. One, then another. The riders were moving below the ridge. The western bone line rattled twice. Eskiminsen pointed toward the loft. Althia climbed without argument. From the firing slit she saw nothing but layered darkness. Firelight from the ridge touched only the upper edges of rocks. The basin below remained black. She remembered the lesson. Do not look for a man. Look for what stops being visible when he moves through it. Stars vanished behind the edge of a low rise. A shadow moved where wind did not. Althia put the front sight there. Not yet, Eskiminsen said from below. The western alarm clicked. A horse snorted. Then came a violent crack of brush and a curse as one of the animals found a hidden depression. The rider fought the reins. Another man hissed at him to be quiet. Althia could hear them now. Real voices. Mercer. Tate. Fear became narrower. She had spent months afraid of a shape large enough to cover the world. Now the shape had voices, boots, sore horses, and men who whispered when they wanted to be brave. One rider moved into a pale band of moonlight. Eskiminsen's rifle fired from the rear port. The man dropped behind his horse. The animal screamed and bolted sideways. Two others broke formation. Someone fired toward the cabin. Bullets struck stone with hard sparks. Althia did not shoot. She waited. A figure crossed the same moonlit strip. She squeezed the trigger. The Winchester kicked into her shoulder. The figure spun and vanished. She worked the lever automatically. A hot brass casing landed against the loft boards and rolled in a bright little circle before going still. Below, Eskiminsen moved positions. Did I hit him? She called. Do not count men during a fight. What do I count? Rounds. Althia almost smiled. She counted. One fired, magazine full before engagement, one chambered. She knew what remained. Shots came from the basin for another minute, then stopped. The riders pulled back. Althia kept her cheek on the stock. Her hand shook only after the sound had died. Eskiminsen climbed halfway up the ladder. You hit stone beside him. She looked down. That was not what I asked. He ran. Good enough. He returned to the floor. The fever surged before dawn. By then the ridge fires had burned low, and the riders had settled into patient silence. Althia swallowed another measured dose of quinine according to Sterling's note, and sat with a blanket over her shoulders, Winchester across her knees. Eskiminsen poured coffee so black it looked like oil. They sat on the floor back to back, each covering a different side of the cabin. The contact of his spine against hers was awkward at first, then practical, warm. Althia drank from the tin mug. The coffee tasted burnt and bitter. Terrible, she whispered. Eskiminsen took a swallow from his own. Yes. You always make it this bad? Yes. Why? Works. She let her head rest for 1 second against the back of his shoulder. Then she sat straight again. The silence between them felt different from the first night. It no longer asked what he wanted from her. It had become a place where neither of them had to perform. Althia looked at the Winchester. I can't remember my father's face. Eskiminsen did not turn. I remember pieces, his hands, the sound he made clearing his throat, gun oil on his sleeves, but his face is gone. Faces change in memory. He sold me. The words came out without warning. Eskiminsen's back remained steady against hers. He owed men money. He said I was going east to live with relatives. Black was waiting at the rail siding. She traced a worn dent on the Winchester receiver. This was in the wagon. I took it the night I escaped. Maybe my father forgot it was there. Maybe he meant me to have it. I used to spend hours deciding which version hurt less. Eskiminsen drank his coffee. Which one? Neither. Then stopped paying for both. Althia breathed out. It was not comfort. It helped. At first light, Eskiminsen went out alone. Althia objected. They are waiting for that. They are waiting for us to stay blind. He checked his revolver and tucked a knife behind his belt. Then I go. No. Her anger rose immediately. You taught me to track. You taught me the perimeter. You said I live inside the defenses. Yes. Then don't put me back in a room because shooting started. Eskiminsen looked at her for a long moment. He reached into his vest and took out a silver pocket watch. The case was scratched, the chain repaired with a piece of wire. He pressed it into her hand. The ridge is too quiet. I need to know what they changed during the dark. Althia closed her fingers around the watch. When the second hand reaches 12 twice, I come back. 2 minutes, 2 turns, 2 hours. Yes, and if you don't, then the valley is yours. She stared at him. That is a poor joke. I am not joking. He moved toward the side exit. Eskiminsen. He paused. Come back. He nodded once and disappeared. Althia barred the opening behind him. The watch ticked louder than it had any right to. She carried it in her pocket while she moved through the cabin checking ports, Water, ammunition, stove, loft, rear wall. She forced herself to do useful things because usefulness was the only defense she knew against imagination. After the first hour, she began to hum, a tune without words, something from before Arizona, before Black. Perhaps her mother had sung it while hanging sheets. She could not remember. The melody did not matter. It belonged to her mouth. Outside, the canyon remained still. Near the end of the second hour, she heard a hoarse, uneven hoofbeats, a wet, hard breath. Althia took position beside the door. Althia, Eskimensen's voice. She did not open immediately. "What did you say the first morning?" she called. "Silence. Then if you faint, do not shoot me on the way down." She lifted the bar. Eskimensen entered with blood soaking his left shoulder. Althia's stomach dropped. "You're hit." "Yes. What happened?" Mercer learned patience. He walked past the bed, past the water basin, straight to the table. He drew his revolver, opened the cylinder, and began replacing spent cartridges. Althia stared at him. "Sit down." "I am sitting." "You know what I mean." He pushed another cartridge into place. The movement of his left arm was too stiff. Blood dripped from his sleeve onto the floor. Althia grabbed the revolver from his hand. His eyes flashed. She pointed it at the table, not him. "If you bleed out with a loaded pistol, I will be very angry." For half a second, she thought he might take it back. Then he leaned against the chair. "Medicine chest," he said. "I know where it is." The bullet had gone through the outer shoulder, leaving a ragged channel without breaking bone. Althia cleaned it with boiled water, while Eskimensen gripped the chair seat. "Sterling says wounds need clean hands," she said. "Sterling talks too much. You barely met him. Enough." She crushed yarrow, packed the bleeding edges, and threaded a curved needle. When she pushed it through, Eskimensen's jaw tightened. "That hurts?" "No." "Good. I was worried." He looked at her. Althia pulled the stitch tight. By noon, he had a fever of his own. That frightened her more than the riders. She made him lie on the pallet despite his objections. He kept his revolver within reach. Althia repaired a harness strap at the table because her hands needed a task. Hours passed. Then the northwest bone line clicked. Once, twice, a sharp series of taps. Human. Althia froze with the leather needle halfway through a strap. Eskimensen opened his eyes. "Stay down," she said. He started to rise. "Stay down, Althia. You gave me the valley." His expression changed. She took the Winchester. The bone alarms continued speaking. Outer line, pause, second line. A heavier clatter near the low wash. One man leading a horse, perhaps two on foot. Althia did not go to the window. She closed her eyes and reconstructed the perimeter from sound. The intruders were probing the western side, trying to learn which routes were trapped. She climbed to the loft. A flash of brass appeared between two rocks, spur buckle. She waited. A shoulder followed. She fired into the dirt a foot in front of him. The man dropped flat. Another gunshot answered from behind the brush. The round struck the iron plate with a deafening clang. Althia worked the lever. The first man ran for cover. She shot the creosote branch beside his head. He stumbled back over the horsehair line. Bones rattled violently. The horse jerked loose and tore through the brush, dragging a coil of line behind it. The second man cursed. Althia smiled without humor. "Now I know where you are." She fired once more. A hat flew into the air. Both men retreated. Below, Eskimensen let out a breath. "You had the shot," he said. "Yes." "You chose the hat." "Yes." "Why?" Althia kept watching the wash. "I wanted him to tell Black I could have chosen his face." Eskimensen was quiet. Then he said, "Good." The word warmed her more than it should have. That evening, while she changed his dressing, she asked the question that had been pressing against her since the spring. "Why did you let Black live?" Eskimensen sat shirtless with his back to her. The old brand lay inches from the new bandage. "When you escaped the mines," she continued, "you knew his trails, his habits. You could have waited on a ridge and ended him." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" He considered. "Because I wanted him to know he had failed." "That is pride." "Some." She tied the bandage. "A dead man becomes whatever story people tell. A defeated man has to live inside what happened." Althia sat back. "That sounds cruel. It can be. Is that what you want now?" Eskimensen turned enough to see her. "I want him gone. Alive, if possible, and if not, then not." Althia nodded. It was the answer she trusted because it did not pretend killing was impossible or noble. Eskimensen reached for the cured buckskin map hanging near the table and spread it flat. He pointed to the northern ridge, then traced a narrow descending route toward a place marked only by a crooked line. "Dead Man's Wash," he said. Althia raised an eyebrow. "Cheerful. It floods." "That's why it is called that?" "No." Because white men like names that save them from admitting they ignored weather. Despite everything, she laughed. He tapped the wash again. Black hates high ground. Althea looked at him. How do you know? I watched him near cliffs. He never rode close to an edge. Never slept above a drop. When we tracked in mountains, he sent others first. Fear of heights. He hides it with anger. Althea studied the map. The wash narrowed between steep walls with high ledges on both sides and a shelf of loose stone above the inner bend. You want to lead him there. I want him to choose it because he thinks you chose badly. She understood. What bait? Eskimensen's eyes dropped toward the floor beside the bed. Althea followed his gaze. Her skin prickled. You knew. The board? The locket. I knew you hid something. You never looked? No. Why, it was yours. The answer hurt in a way kindness sometimes did. Althea retrieved the locket from beneath the floor. She turned it in her palm. Black saw this before? He knows you value it? Yes. Then he will follow it. She closed her fingers around the silver. Good. They spent the next day preparing not to defend the cabin, but to abandon it at the right moment. Eskimensen could not lift heavy weight with his wounded shoulder, so Althea did more of the carrying. They moved powder to 2 concealed points near the lower pass, not to blow men apart, but to create noise and dust when needed. She checked the horsehair lines, reset shallow pits, marked safe routes with stones only she and Eskimensen would recognize. Naish returned after dark. He listened while Eskimensen explained the plan. Black will retreat south if the basin turns against him. Naishi said, yes, I can hold the pass. With bullets? Althea asked. Naishi looked almost offended. Bullets are expensive. He opened his saddlebag and removed a flat cedar blade attached to a long cord. Althea stared. What is that? A loud piece of wood. Eskimensen nodded as if this explained everything. Naish spun at once outside the cabin. The bull roarer produced a low, rising thrum that vibrated in Althea's ribs. The corral horse snorted and backed away. She understood. You plan to scare their horses in the pass. Naish wrapped the cord carefully. I plan to let their horses decide whether Black is worth dying for. Before leaving, he handed Althea 2 cloth packets of cartridges. Do not shoot at shadows, he said. I've heard. Eskimensen says it badly. From the table, Eskimensen said leave. Naishi grinned and disappeared into the night. By the 3rd night, the ridge fires returned. Black had stopped pretending he was merely watching. A voice carried down from above. Althea! Her stomach tightened. Gideon, come out and this ends. Eskimensen sat at the table cleaning a knife. Althea stood by the window. Black shouted again. You know how this works? You cost me men, horses, money? I'm willing to call the debt even. Althea almost admired the lie. He had never once been willing to call a debt even in his life. She opened the firing port. Eskimensen looked up. What are you doing? Talking to Black? Yes, why? I want to hear whether his voice shakes. She leaned close to the opening. What do you call even, Gideon? Silence from the ridge. Then his voice returned, smaller somehow because she had answered without fear. You walk away. I walk away. You rode 5 men into a canyon for a woman you planned to let a pause? Eskimensen's mouth shifted at one corner. Black shouted, you were bought fair. Althea felt the old heat rise in her chest. She kept her voice level. Then show me the receipt. Nothing. You always kept such good ledgers. A rifle fired from the ridge. The bullet struck stone above the window. Althea closed the port. His voice shakes, she said. Eskimensen resumed cleaning the knife. Good. Near midnight the first torch came down. It spun end over end, pitch-soaked cloth burning orange through the dark. The torch struck the porch roof. Flame caught immediately in the old resinous wood. Althea heard herself curse. Another torch landed near the lean-to. Fire crawled up dry cedar. She reached for a water bucket. Eskimensen stopped her. We cannot outcarry fire and bullets. The cabin stone walls stay. The porch won't. No. Althea looked at him. He was letting part of his home burn. His face remained calm, but his right hand had closed so tightly around the rifle stock that his knuckles showed pale. He felt it. He simply refused to let the feeling choose for him. Smoke entered through the roof gaps. The fire brightened the basin. For one terrifying second, Althea thought Black had won the night. Then she saw the riders. Firelight had stripped them of darkness. 3 silhouettes near the western rocks, 1 horse behind a juniper, a man crawling toward the stable wall. Eskimensen saw them too. The fire belongs to whoever uses it, he said. He opened the side escape and vanished into smoke. Althea took the loft. Outside, the riders began advancing toward the suddenly illuminated cabin. They expected panic. Instead, the western bone line rattled. A horse stepped into a shallow pit and lurched. Its rider fought to stay mounted. Althia fired at the rock beside his boot. The horse spun, throwing him. Another rider fired toward the loft. The iron plate rang. Althia shifted positions. Below, smoke thickened. She saw a shadow move behind one of Black's men. Escaminzin, no rifle flash. He came up close behind the rider's horse and cut the saddle cinch. The rider raised a pistol toward the cabin, shifted his weight, and fell sideways with saddle and all. The horse bolted. Someone shouted. Escaminzin vanished before they found him. Chaos spread faster than the fire. The men had trained for gunfire. They had not trained for invisible lines, unstable saddles, frightened horses, shifting smoke, and a defender who moved through the basin without showing where he was. Althia fired only when she had a clear reason. One shot shattered a torch before it reached the roof. Another struck the stock of Mercer's rifle and knocked it from his hand. A third hit a rock at Tate's feet, showering him with chips and forcing him behind cover. Then Althia saw the flanker. He moved along the cabin's blind eastern wall with a short shotgun held against his chest. He was close to the corner where Escaminzin had just disappeared. Too close. If Althia shouted, the man would know Escaminzin was near. If she stayed in the loft, Escaminzin would step into the shotgun. She backed from the firing slit, climbed down. The smoke inside was thick enough to sting tears from her eyes. She slipped through the rear door and hugged the stone foundation. The flanker reached the corner. Althia stepped into the open. He turned. For one heartbeat, they stared at each other. She recognized him then. Cole, the man who had held her wrists. His surprise was almost childlike. You? He swung the shotgun. Althia fired. The Winchester slammed her shoulder. Cole dropped, the shotgun discharging into the dirt as he fell. The blast sprayed gravel against her trousers. Althia stood frozen. She had shot at men before. This was the first time she had watched one die because she chose the exact moment. Escaminzin appeared from smoke 10 yards away. His eyes went from Cole to Althia. She waited for something, approval, concern, judgment. He said only, move. A bullet struck the stone where her head had been. Althia moved. They retreated through the rear path as fire ate the porch and lean-to. Black's riders pressed toward the cabin, thinking the defenders had withdrawn in defeat. That was what Escaminzin wanted. He led Althia through the safe seam in the perimeter toward the upper rocks. Behind them, the basin glowed orange. Then the southern pass filled with a sound so low and strange that Althia felt it before she understood it. Naishi's bull roarer. The thrum rolled through stone. The riders' horses panicked. One reared. Another backed into a third. A man fell and screamed as his leg caught under a hoof. Reins tangled. Saddles shifted. Black shouted orders that vanished beneath the rising vibration. Althia and Escaminzin reached a high shelf and looked down. Naishi stood somewhere above the southern pass, invisible except for the moving shadow of the cord. He had turned their retreat into a knot. Now? Althia asked. Escaminzin watched Gideon Black below. Black was off, his hat was gone. His coat hung open. He kept looking upward in short, frantic glances and then forcing his eyes back to ground level. Fear of heights, yes, Escaminzin said. Now, Althia took the silver locket from her pocket. The metal reflected firelight. She closed her fingers around it. For a moment she saw herself as she had been when she first arrived. Dust-white face, cracked lips, boots wrapped in blood, rifle held as if it were the last railing above a pit. Then she stepped away from the ledge. Dead man's wash, she said. Escaminzin nodded. I will be above you. No, his eyes narrowed. You'll be where he can't see you, she corrected. I lead him. That was always the plan. I know. I'm reminding myself. She tucked the Winchester under her arm and began descending toward the dark cut in the earth. The route into Dead Man's Wash began behind a row of low basalt teeth and dropped through a narrow channel cut by old floodwater. Althia moved fast enough to be seen and slow enough to be followed. That difference mattered. She stepped on soft ground where her boots would leave clear impressions, let the hem of her coat drag once across a thorn, broke a dry twig at knee height. At the first bend, she took out the silver locket and pressed it into the dust, leaving a clean oval mark before moving on. Behind her, somewhere beyond the washmouth, men shouted over panicked horses and burning timber. She did not look back. The Winchester rested in both hands now. The fever had passed into a dull ache behind her eyes. Her body felt light in the strange way that came after too much fear, every sound separate, every surface sharp. She could smell hot stone, old water trapped beneath mud, smoke carried from the cabin, and the sour animal scent of a horse being forced where it did not want to go. A pistol fired behind her. The bullet struck the wall high and sent small stones ticking down. Gideon's voice followed. "Stop running." Althea kept moving. She almost laughed. For a year he had taught her that running was the only useful thing she could do. Now that she had learned when to stop, he wanted the old version back. The wash narrowed. She reached the first shelf. Eskimindsen had shown her on the map and scrambled up a sloping seam of rock. From there she crossed above the channel for 30 yards. Then dropped down again where loose shell would disguise the transition. At the inner bend, she stopped. The canyon wall rose almost straight on her left. On the right, the ground tilted up toward a fractured ledge of conglomerate and sandstone. A pale vein of quartz cut through the base of the ledge. The whole shelf looked solid until a person knew where to look. Eskimindsen had made her study it twice. Floodwater had eaten under the lower layer. Heat and winter cold had widened the cracks. A hard strike at the quartz seam would not bring the mountain down, but it might release enough of the unstable face to choke the narrowest part of the wash. Might. Plans were made of that word. Althea took out the locket. She held it in her palm. There had been a time when she believed whatever was inside mattered more than anything she had become since. A name, a tiny picture perhaps. Proof that she had once belonged somewhere clean, somewhere with curtains and polished furniture, and a father whose hands did not tremble around debt collectors. Now the locket felt different, still hers. But not sacred. She placed it in the dust beside the bend where light from the paling eastern sky would catch it. Then she climbed. A narrow crack in the wall gave her handholds. She pulled herself onto a shelf 8 feet above the wash, crawled behind a broken slab, and settled the Winchester across the rock. Her heart hammered. She listened. Bootsteps, not horse. Gideon had dismounted. Of course he had. The wash was too narrow for comfort, and a horse would make him feel less in control. His breathing reached her before his body came around the bend. Then his boots appeared, polished leather covered now in dust. His dark coat was torn at one shoulder. Blood ran from a shallow cut near his temple. He held a pearl-handled revolver low and ready. He saw the locket. Stopped. Althea watched greed change his posture. The locket was worth little. Greed for proof. He picked it up, turned it over. His mouth spread in a thin smile. "I knew you'd keep this." He looked ahead into the wash. Althea. The way he said the name made it sound stolen. She stayed still. "You always were sentimental." He moved deeper. "Come on. Your Apache friend's house is burning. One of his men is down. You're tired. I'm tired." A lie and a truth placed side by side so she would swallow both. Gideon stepped beneath the unstable ledge. Althea did not shoot yet. She wanted him farther in. He opened the locket, but the jammed hinge resisted. He cursed and shoved it into his coat pocket. Then he looked up, not at her shelf, at the high rim. His eyes flicked away immediately. Eskimindsen had been right. The man who walked into gunfire hated open height. Althea shifted her boot deliberately. One small stone fell from her shelf. It clicked against the wall. Gideon's spun. His revolver came up. "There you are." Althea rose enough for him to see her. His face changed. For a moment neither of them spoke. She saw the man from the camps, the clean cuffs, the expensive tobacco, the careful beard, the way he had kept ledgers on human beings with the neat handwriting of a shopkeeper. But she also saw what the canyon had done to him. Dust in his eyes, split lip. One boot scuffed nearly through at the toe, fear tightening the tendons in his neck whenever he glanced upward. He was smaller than memory. That was not forgiveness. It was information. "Put the rifle down," Gideon said. "No." His mouth twitched. "You learned that word. I knew it before you. Your father didn't." The words hit where he intended. Althea's finger tightened near the trigger. Gideon saw it and smiled. "There she is." He stepped closer. "You think that man made you something new? He just taught you different tricks. You're still running someone else's plan." Althea looked past him toward the pale quartz vein. "You came alone?" she asked. Gideon frowned. "Does it matter?" "Yes, Mercer's behind me. Tate too." Another lie. She had heard only one set of boots for several minutes, then called them. His jaw tightened. Althea knew. The others were scattered, wounded, or trying to escape the pass. Gideon raised his revolver higher. "You were worth money once. Now you're costing it. That must hurt. You think this is funny?" "No." She looked directly at him. "I think you are." He fired. Althea dropped behind the slab. The bullet shattered rock where her shoulder had been. She rolled to the side, brought up the Winchester, and fired not at Gideon, but at the pale quartz seam. The report slammed back and forth between the wash walls. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then came a deep scrape. stone shifting on stone. Gideon looked up, his face emptied, the ledge broke, not all at once, first a fan of shale. Then a heavy slab slid forward, struck the slope below, and split. More rock followed. Dust exploded through the wash in a white-brown wall. Gideon ran. The revolver fell from his hand. He made 3 steps before a slab struck the ground beside him and threw him sideways. Another piece pinned his lower legs. Then the world disappeared in dust. Althia pressed her face into her sleeve and waded through the grinding roar. Small stones continued falling long after the main slide stopped. When the air cleared enough to see, she climbed down carefully. Gideon lay half on his side beneath a sandstone slab from the knees down, alive, bleeding, terrified. His pistol was gone under rubble. He tried to move the stone with both hands. It did not shift. Althia approached with the Winchester leveled. Gideon stopped struggling. "Help me." The words sounded strange from him. Althia said nothing. Althia. She looked at the coat pocket where he had placed the locket. "Give it back," he stared. The locket. He reached slowly, pulled it out, and held it toward her. His hand shook. Althia took it. For a moment she could smell the camp again. Burnt coffee, leather, men laughing, heated iron. Gideon saw something in her face and began talking fast. "Your father owed me, you know that. I didn't make the debt. I didn't make the market. People sell what they have when they need to live." Althia crouched beside him. "You made it sound so ordinary. It was ordinary. That was the worst part." His eyes moved to the rifle. "Kill me then," she almost did. Not because he asked, because the simplicity of it pulled at her. One pressure of the finger, no more ridge, no more voice in dreams. No chance of return. Then she heard boots above. Gideon heard them too. He looked up and went pale. Eskiminson appeared on the rim. He stood with his wounded arm close to his body, rifle hanging in his good hand. He did not aim. He simply looked down. Gideon's fear deepened. That interested Althia. He had feared Eskiminson more than death, because death could become a story. Eskiminson alive was memory that walked. Althia looked again at the locket. She worked a fingernail into the damaged hinge. It opened a fraction, not enough to see inside. She closed it. "My father called me Elena," she said. Gideon blinked. The name sounded strange after so long. Althia continued. "You called me Seven. I called myself Althia." She stood. "You don't get to decide which one is real." Gideon's face twisted. "You leave me here, I die." Althia looked at the slab. Then at Eskiminson. He waited. The choice was hers. That mattered more than the outcome. "We get him out," she said. Eskiminson did not question her. They used a long juniper pole and smaller stones as fulcrums. It took nearly half an hour. Gideon screamed when the slab shifted off his legs. One ankle was badly swollen but not broken. His left calf bled through torn trousers. Althia gave him enough water to swallow. Not enough to be comfortable. When he could sit upright, Eskiminson searched him. Knife, spare cartridges, purse, matches, tobacco tin. He placed the weapons aside. Gideon glared. "What now?" Eskiminson looked at Althia. Again her choice. "We walk him back," she said. "Back where?" Gideon demanded. "Home." Hope flashed in his face. Althia almost smiled. "Not yours." They returned toward the basin by a slower route. Gideon limped between them. The sun climbed, warming the canyon walls until night's cold vanished. Smoke from the cabin lay in a low gray layer over the valley. They passed Cole's body near the eastern wall. Gideon looked away. Althia did not. She forced herself to see what she had done, not as punishment but as accounting. A man had tried to kill Eskiminson. She had killed him first. There would be no clean story made of it. Near the ruined porch, they found another rider crouched against a rock with both hands raised. Reese. Blood had dried along his ear where a bullet or rock chip had grazed him. His rifle lay 10 feet away. When he saw Althia, he began begging. "Please, I'm done, I swear, I'm done." Gideon sneered. "Pick up your rifle." Reese shook his head. "Pick it up." Althia lifted the Winchester toward him. Reese flinched and covered his head. For a terrible second, she wanted to fire. She remembered him laughing near the cook fire when Black priced her as if discussing cattle. She remembered him holding a lantern while another prisoner was beaten. Her finger found the trigger. Then she realized he was no threat now. Killing him would not defend anything. It would only satisfy the part of her that had learned cruelty from experts. She lowered the rifle. "Walk south," she said. Reese stared. Now, he got up and ran limping toward the pass. Gideon watched him go. "You think mercy makes you better?" Althia looked at him. "No, choice does." Naishi emerged from the rocks above the southern trail. He had a scrape across one cheek and dust covering his hair. "Mercer left on foot," he said. "Tate has a broken arm." Both went east. 2 horses ran south. One may be in Mexico by supper. He looked at Gideon. Ugly morning. Gideon spat into the dirt. Naishi glanced at Eskaminzen. What do you want done with him? Eskaminzen looked toward Althia. She was becoming tired of everyone making that point, though she understood why they kept doing it. Nothing that makes us his jailers, she said. Eskaminzen nodded. He led Gideon to the edge of the yard where the open basin met the northern trail. Then he crouched and removed Gideon's boots. The bounty hunter jerked his feet back. What are you doing? Eskaminzen threw one boot into a cactus-choked ravine, then the other. Gideon stared. You son of... Eskaminzen took the canteen from Gideon's belt. Althia watched him unscrew the cap. For a second, she thought he would empty it into the dirt. Enough, she said. Eskaminzen stopped. The canyon went quiet around them. Althia walked over, took the canteen, and poured half the water into a smaller tin flask. She handed the remaining half back to Gideon. His face showed confusion, then contempt. You think that proves something? It proves I don't need the desert to murder you for me. She pointed north. There is water at Mesquite Spring if you make the old freight trail before dark. You know the way. Gideon looked from her to Eskaminzen. Barefoot, injured, coat torn, he no longer resembled the man who had owned camps and men and ledgers, but Althea did not mistake humiliation for transformation. He had not changed. He had only lost. That was enough for today. Eskaminzen spoke for the first time since the wash. The sun waits for men who think it belongs to them. Gideon stared at him. Then he turned north. His first steps over the sharp ground were clumsy. He tried to keep dignity in his back, but pain bent him within 20 yards. Althea stood beside Eskaminzen and watched until Gideon became a dark figure moving through heat shimmer. Naishi sat on a rock behind them. You gave him water, he said. Yes, he may return. Yes, you may regret it. Yes. Naishi nodded. Good. Althea looked at him. That is your answer? Regret means you were free enough to choose wrong. Eskaminzen gave Naish a flat look. Leave. Naish smiled. Your coffee burned? Leave. He did. Only when the basin was quiet again did Althea turn toward the cabin. The porch roof had partially collapsed. One support beam was blackened through. The lean-to was gone. The door carried 3 bullet scars. Smoke still rose from a patch of charred boards where they had thrown sand over embers. Her chest tightened. They had won. The place still looked wounded. She had expected victory to feel cleaner. Eskaminzen picked up a shovel. His injured shoulder sagged with fatigue. Althea took the shovel from him. No, I can work. You can sit. I dislike sitting. I know. He looked at her. She pointed toward the porch step. Consider it training. He sat. Althea began throwing dirt over the last smoking edge of the porch. The ordinary sound of the shovel scraping earth nearly undid her. After gunfire, fire, men shouting, horses screaming, rock falling, Gideon begging, the simple scrape of metal against dirt felt too gentle for what had happened. Her eyes burned. She kept working. By afternoon, they had cleared the dangerous boards and pulled down the remaining burned section of roof. Naish returned with 2 cedar poles and no commentary. He helped set them beside the wall, drank 1 cup of water, and left again. Eskaminzen's fever rose after sunset. Althea changed his dressing, gave him willow bark, and threatened to tie him to the bed when he tried to check the perimeter. You would fail, he said. Probably. You admit it. I'd use the iron plate from the window. He considered. That might work. She laughed before she could stop herself. The sound filled the small cabin. Both of them became still. Althea had forgotten what her own laughter sounded like when it was not sharp or frightened. Eskaminzen looked away first. Sleep, she said. He did. Althea took the first watch. The northern ridge was empty. No fires, no riders, only stars. She opened the locket beneath the lantern. The damaged hinge resisted, but the rockfall had bent the seam enough that the blade of a small paring knife could enter. She worked slowly. A little pressure. Turn. More pressure. The silver squealed softly. Then the case snapped open. Inside was no portrait. Only a tiny inner plate with 1 word engraved in fading script. Elena Althea stared at it. A room returned to her memory. White curtains moving in summer air. Piano keys yellowed with age. Her mother's brush pulling through her hair. Her father younger, before debt had turned every conversation into calculation. Elena belonged there. Elena had believed adults meant what they said. Elena had believed a father might lose land but not his daughter. Althea touched the engraving. For months she had thought recovering the name would restore something. Instead, it felt like opening a door into an empty house. She did not hate the girl who had lived there. She simply could not move back in. Althea closed the locket and tucked it into her pocket. The name was hers, so was Althia. Owning both meant she did not have to choose tonight. At dawn, she found Eskaminzin awake. He sat on the bed with his feet on the floor, listening to the yard. "You opened it," he said. Althea looked down at the locket chain visible near her pocket. "Yes, good," she thought. "True." He nodded as if truth and goodness were separate tools and sometimes a person needed one more than the other. "What is inside?" "A name." He waited. She smiled faintly. "You plan to write me a letter?" Eskaminzin looked at her. Then slowly the corner of his mouth lifted. "No, then Althea is enough." "Yes." Outside, morning had begun turning the canyon walls gold. They stepped onto what remained of the porch. The yard smelled of wet ash, creosote, gunpowder, and the cold, clean scent of the spring. A hawk circled high above the ridge. Althea watched it until the bird became a small moving mark against the blue. "The gate is broken," Eskaminzin said. She looked toward the splintered cedar posts. "So it is." He reached for his shirt. Althea took the hammer from the wall. "Coffee first. Work first." "Your coffee is punishment, not food. It works. That is not a defense." Eskaminzin considered. "Gate first." Althea rolled her eyes and followed him into the yard. Repairing the gate took longer than fighting for it. The old cedar post had split near the base where a horse struck it during the night. Eskaminzin wedged an iron pry bar under the ruined timber, while Althea cleared packed dirt from around the footing with a shovel. Every few minutes he forgot about his shoulder and reached too far. Every few minutes she slapped his hand away. "I can lift one end," he said. "You can also tear those stitches and make me sew you again. You would enjoy that. I would use thicker thread." He studied her face to see whether she meant it. She did not tell him. They levered the broken post free just before noon. The hole beneath it smelled of damp clay, a cool hidden scent beneath all the scorched dust. Althea crouched to widen the base while Eskaminzin shaped a replacement cedar with an axe held one-handed. The valley was quiet, but neither of them treated quiet as proof. Every few minutes Althea stopped and listened. No bone alarms, no hooves, no rifle metal striking rock, only flies, wind, distant water, and the steady chop of the axe. The work brought feeling back into her body in pieces, her shoulder bruised from recoil. Her right thigh hurt where shotgun gravel had struck it. A burn on the back of her hand had blistered. Her fever left her weak whenever she stood too fast. She welcomed all of it. Pain meant there was a body to return to after fear. At midday, Eskaminzin sat in the shade while Althea reheated beans. He watched her stir the pot. "You used too much salt." She tasted it. "No. Yes. You've been drinking campfire tar and calling it coffee for 20 years. Your tongue has no standing in this court." "What court?" "This one." He accepted the bowl she handed him. After 2 bites he said, "Too much salt." Althea threw a folded rag at him. He caught it with his good hand. For several seconds they sat in the shade eating oversalted beans, while smoke from the ruined lean-to drifted in thin threads toward the ridge. It was the safest Althea had felt in years. The thought frightened her enough that she put down the spoon. Eskaminzin noticed. "What?" "Nothing." He waited. She hated that he could wait longer than anyone she had ever known. "Keep thinking something should happen," she said. "Something is happening. We're eating beans." "Yes, that's what I mean." Eskaminzin looked toward the gate. "After danger, ordinary things feel false." Althea looked at him. "You know that too?" "Yes." "What do you do?" "Keep doing them until they are ordinary again." She picked up her spoon. The beans were too salty. She ate them anyway. In the afternoon they dealt with the dead. Cole lay where he had fallen near the eastern wall. A second rider, Mercer, they discovered, had died farther out near the first perimeter line from the wound Eskaminzin gave him during the opening exchange. Althea had not known he was dead. She had imagined him retreating with Tate. Seeing the body made the night change shape in memory. They wrapped both men in canvas. Naishi arrived with a shovel before anyone sent for him. "No one called you," Althea said. "No." "How did you know?" "Vultures." He pointed to the sky. 2 birds circled low beyond the western rock. They buried the bodies in a hard patch of ground above flood level. There were no prayers. Naishi placed stones over the graves to discourage scavengers. Althea stood over Cole's mound longer than she intended. In memory, his hand was still around her wrist. She could feel the pressure of his thumb against the tendon, hear him laughing when she tried to pull away. Now there was only dirt. She expected satisfaction. What she felt was tired. Naishi leaned on the shovel. "You knew him?" "Looked at him." "No." Naishi nodded. He did not ask more. On the walk back, she said, "I thought killing one of them would make the old things quieter." Eskaminzin was a few steps ahead. He slowed, but did not turn. Naishi answered, sometimes it does. And if it doesn't, then it was still necessary or it was not. Silence is not proof either way. Althea looked at the dust beneath her boots. You two have a very irritating way of saying useful things. Naishi smiled. Eskiminzen learned it from me. From ahead came Eskiminzen's voice. Lie. Naish laughed once. At the gate he stopped. Sterling is coming tomorrow. Althea frowned. The doctor? I sent word before the fight. Eskiminzen turned. You did not tell me. You would have said no. Yes, that is why. Naishi mounted and rode south before Eskiminzen could continue. Althea looked at him. You have difficult friends. One. That is still a problem. They finished setting the new gatepost before dark. Eskiminzen held the cedar steady while Althea packed stone and earth around its base. Then they rehung the gate and tested it. It swung too easily. Eskiminzen adjusted the lower hinge. The second time it moved in a slow, controlled arc and settled without a squeak. He stepped back. The gate is fixed. Althea wiped sweat from her forehead. It should be. It has consumed an entire day. It will consume another if Black returns. The name did not strike her the way it had before. She noticed that. Do you think he made the spring? If he followed the freight trail, and if he didn't? Eskiminzen looked north. The desert does not need our help, being the desert. Althea thought of the half-full canteen. She did not regret it. Not yet. That night they cleaned the Winchester together. Althea sat across from Eskiminzen at the scarred table. The lantern flame moved gently when wind found a crack in the wall. Between them lay the rifle in pieces, lever, bolt, screws, firing pin, barrel, stock. A week earlier, the sight of a dismantled gun might have made her uneasy. Now the parts looked almost domestic beside a coffee mug and a plate with 2 slices of stale bread. Eskiminzen handed her the oiling cloth. She wiped carbon from the receiver. You lied to me, she said. He looked up. When? First night. What did I say? No one can hurt you here. Eskiminzen waited. They hurt me. She touched the bruise on her shoulder. They burned the porch. Shot you. Killed men in the yard. Yes. So the promise was wrong. Yes. Althea stared. That's it? What answer do you want? I don't know. Defend yourself. I made a promise no person can make. Why? Eskiminzen picked up the bolt and turned it under the light. Because you needed to sleep. Althea looked down at the cloth. The answer should have made her angry. Instead, a painful warmth rose behind her ribs. You knew it wasn't true. I knew I would try. That is different. Yes. She worked oil into the metal. What would you say now? He considered for a long time. No one owns what happens to you next. Althea stopped moving. The cabin settled around them. That's worse, she said softly. Eskiminzen raised an eyebrow. Harder to sleep with. Yes. She smiled. But true, yes. When the rifle was clean, Eskiminzen did not put it beside the bed or door. He lifted it onto 2 iron hooks above the hearth. Althea watched. You're unarmed. Revolver. Where? He pointed to the table. The revolver lay 3 feet away from his hand. For Eskiminzen, that counted as unarmed. Althea understood the gesture anyway. The rifle remained over the fire all night. Neither of them touched it. Dr. Julian Sterling arrived the next afternoon in a battered wagon pulled by a gray mule that looked offended by the entire territory. Sterling climbed down muttering about roads, fools, heat, and people who believed getting shot was a reasonable substitute for preventive medicine. He was a narrow man with rolled sleeves, a sweat-dark vest, and spectacles that constantly slid down his nose. He saw Eskiminzen's bandage. Who stitched that? Althea raised one hand. Sterling looked at her fingers. Clean needle, boiled, thread, linen, wash, boiled water, then yarrow. Sterling grunted. Acceptable. Eskiminzen sat at the table. I told her it was fine. Sterling turned on him. You also once told me a cracked rib was annoying. Your medical opinions have no legal value. Althea laughed. Sterling stared at her for half a second as if surprised to hear the sound, then bent over Eskiminzen's shoulder. The wound was clean, no deep infection. He changed the dressing, left powdered antiseptic and more bandage cloth, then examined Althea's fever and the bruising along her shoulder. You followed the quinine schedule? Yes. Exactly? Yes. Sterling peered over his spectacles. She lies less than you, he told Eskiminzen. Most people do, Eskiminzen said. While he packed his bag, Sterling looked around at the shot marks in the door and charred porch beams. Naish told me some version of what happened. What version? Althea asked. The one where he personally defeated 6 armed men with a piece of wood. That is close. Sterling sighed. I was afraid of that. He closed the medicine chest. There is a stage route through Benson in 3 days. I can take you as far as the road tomorrow. Althea stiffened. Sterling continued before she could respond. No questions. No sheriff. No papers unless you ask. From there you could go west or east. Tucson, California, New Mexico. I know people who can help with work. Eskimenson said nothing. Althea looked at him. His face had become unreadable in the old way. That irritated her. You want me to go? She asked. No. The answer came immediately. Sterling looked between them and busied himself tying his bag. Althea's throat tightened. You want me to stay? Eskimenson considered this longer. I want you to choose without a rifle pointed at your back. The room became very quiet. Sterling cleared his throat. I'll water the mule. He went outside. Althea sat at the table. For nearly a month, every decision had been shaped by pursuit. Where to sleep, how long to stay near water, which road to avoid. Whether to trust a stranger, whether to shoot, whether to run. Now a road had opened with no one chasing her down it. That made the choice harder. What is there for me here? She asked. Eskimenson looked around the cabin as if taking inventory. Roof needs replacing. She stared. West fence is weak. Her mouth opened. Garden needs turning before the ground hardens. Eskimenson. Horse needs shoes. She began laughing. He waited until she stopped. Then he added more quietly, there is room. Althea looked at him. That was all. No claim, no debt, no promise he could not keep. There is room. She stood and walked outside. Sterling pretended to be deeply interested in the mule's left ear. You heard all of that, Althea said. I am a doctor. We hear things while pretending not to. What would you do? Sterling adjusted the mule's bridle. If I answered, you could blame me later. That is cowardly, very. She leaned against the fence. The northern ridge was empty. The gate stood repaired. Beyond it, the land stretched toward every place she could go. Sterling's wagon offered a route back into towns, where beds had sheets and food could be bought without killing anything first. She could find work. Change her name again. Travel east, perhaps find out whether anyone from her old life remained. All possible. None required permission. That was new. She reached into her pocket and held the locket. Elena, she whispered. Sterling glanced over. What? Nothing. The name belonged to her past, but did not command her future. That was new too. I'm staying, she said. Sterling nodded as if she had chosen between two medicines. For now, Althea looked at the cabin. For as long as I choose. Good answer. He left before sunset. Althea watched the wagon vanish through the southern pass. Eskimenson stood beside her but did not ask whether she had decided. She let him wait until the wagon dust disappeared. Roof first, she said. He looked at the burned structure. Gate is fixed. I know. Roof first, yes. He nodded. That was how she told him. The next week passed without riders. They cut charred roof beams down and replaced them with cedar. Nish brought shingles scavenged from an abandoned line shack. Sterling sent nails, quinine, and a note that read "Stop getting shot" in capital letters. Althea pinned it beside the medicine chest. Eskimenson took it down. She put it back. He took it down again. She hammered a nail where he could not reach comfortably without using his injured arm. The note stayed. They repaired the western fence, reset the creosote perimeter, replaced burned bone alarms, filled the shallow pits disturbed by the horses and dug new ones where tracks showed the riders had found safer ground. But the defenses changed. Before the siege, every ritual had been built around the belief that someone might come. Afterward, they also made room for the possibility that no one would. Eskimenson moved one water bucket away from its silent position because it was easier to reach from the garden. Althea hung a spoon on a hook, even though it made a small sound when the wind came through the window. They opened the western shutter at supper because the evening light was beautiful. Small risks. Ordinary risks. The kind people took when they believed they might have a tomorrow large enough to be inconvenient. One evening, Althea found the 6 white quartz stones on the basalt slab disturbed. Her hand went immediately toward the Winchester, hanging over the hearth inside. Then she stopped. Tiny prints crossed the dust. Quail. She crouched and laughed under her breath. Eskimenson approached from behind. What? Your tactical religion has been defeated by a bird. He examined the tracks. 7 birds. That does not improve your position. He rearranged the stones. Althea watched his careful fingers. Why 6? She asked. What stones? Why 6? Eskimenson sat back on his heels. For once he seemed uncertain whether to answer. Althea waited. He looked toward the ridge. People. My mother, brother, 2 sisters, an uncle, a boy I could not bring out of the mine. Althea's humor faded. You never told me. You did not ask. I asked why you lived here. That is not the same question. She sat beside the rock. Do the stones keep them alive? No, then why move them every day? Eskiminson touched one with his thumb. Because memory needs work or it becomes worship. Althea thought of the locket. She took it from her pocket and set it beside the 6 stones. The tarnished silver looked small among the white quartz. Elena, she said. Eskiminson looked at her. That was my name. Was? Is, maybe. He waited. My mother called me Elena. My father did too before. She stopped. Before was enough. I thought if I opened this, I'd know who I was supposed to become again. And it only told me who I had been. Eskiminson nodded. Useful? Some. I'm keeping Althea. For now? She looked at him sharply. He had heard Sterling. For as long as I choose. Good. She slipped the locket into her pocket. They sat beside the stones until the last light left the ridge. In the second week after the siege, a rider appeared on the far north trail. Althea saw him first. She was repairing a saddle strap on the porch when the movement caught her eye. Her body reacted before thought. Needle down, Winchester from the hooks, 1 round chambered, back against stone. Eskiminson came from the corral carrying a hammer. He did not tell her to lower the gun. They watched. The rider was alone. No dark coat, no polished boots. As he came closer, they recognized Reese, the man Althea had spared. He stopped well beyond rifle distance and raised both hands. A white cloth was tied around one wrist. I'm not coming closer, he called. Althea kept the Winchester on him. What do you want? Reese swallowed. To tell you Black made the spring. Althea felt nothing at first. Then relief came, small and unwelcome. He alive? Last I saw. A freight wagon found him yesterday morning, took him toward Benson. Eskiminsen's expression did not change. Reese continued, Tate's gone east. Mercer's dead. I heard. I'm leaving territory. Why tell us? Althea asked. Reese looked at the ground. Because you let me walk. That buys nothing. I know. He looked up again. I thought maybe you'd want to know the ridge stays empty. Althea studied him. Does Black plan to return? Reese laughed once without humor. Black can barely stand, and people heard what happened. Men who used to ride when he snapped his fingers are pretending they never knew him. Eskiminsen's old idea returned to Althea. A defeated man carries the failure. She had not believed it fully. Perhaps she still did not. But somewhere beyond the canyon, Gideon Black was alive inside a story he could no longer control. That was enough. Go, she told Reese. He nodded. Before turning his horse, he said, For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Althea's grip tightened on the rifle. Sorry. A small word asked to stand beside large things. It isn't worth much, she said. Reese lowered his eyes. No, he rode away. Althea watched until the dust settled. Then she lowered the Winchester. Her hands were shaking. Eskiminsen set the hammer down. You did not shoot. He wasn't a threat. Yes. He apologized. Yes. I wanted to hit him with the rifle. That also would have been a choice. She laughed despite herself. They hung the Winchester back over the hearth. The ridge remained empty. Summer edged toward a different kind of heat. Morning stayed cool a little longer. Clouds gathered twice in the west and gave them no rain. The garden produced small onions, beans, and 3 stubborn squash. Althea repaired her boots with leather cut from an old saddlebag and threw away the blood-stiffened scraps she had arrived in. She found herself speaking more. Not about the camps every day. Not about her father or Black. About flour, weather. Whether a fence line should move 10 feet to avoid a wash. Whether Naishi cheated at cards. Whether Sterling's handwriting was deliberately ugly. Eskiminsen answered more too, sometimes with 1 word. Sometimes 3 progress. One afternoon, Althea was on the roof setting shingles when Eskiminsen climbed the ladder carrying nails. You're not supposed to use that arm above shoulder height, she said. Sterling said 2 weeks. It has been 13 days. Close. No, he handed her the nails. You counted. I count many things. I noticed. He sat on the roof edge instead of working. Below them, the repaired gate cast a long shadow across the yard. The new porch roof was nearly complete. The west fence stood straight. Beyond the perimeter, the canyon opened toward the desert. Althea hammered 1 nail, then another. She stopped. Did you mean it? What? That you wanted me to stay? Yes. Why? Eskiminsen looked at the yard. Althea waited. You move the water bucket too often, he said. She frowned. You put too much salt in beans. Careful. You argue with written medical advice as if paper can hear you. That is you. You leave tools where they are useful instead of where I kept them for 10 years. Althea stared. He looked at her finally. The place changed. Her throat tightened. Is that bad? No. The answer was quiet. She sat beside him on the roof. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. Far above, a hawk turned in wide circles. The canyon smelled of warm cedar, dust, and creosote. Althea looked toward the northern ridge where Gideon Black had first appeared. She could remember every detail of that evening. The needle in her hand, the blood on her thumb, 5 riders cut black against orange sky. The old instinct to hide the rifle. She did not hate the woman who had wanted to hide. That surprised her. That woman had kept moving long enough to reach the canyon. She deserved more respect than Althea had given her. Eskimenzen, yes, when I came here, I thought surviving meant nobody ever got close enough to hurt me again. He waited. I think I was wrong. Yes, she elbowed him lightly. You could pretend to consider my revelations before agreeing. I considered this 1 week ago. She shook her head. What do you think it means? Surviving? Yes. He looked out over the basin, having something left to do after. Althea looked at the unfinished roof. That is annoyingly practical. Yes. She picked up the hammer. They finished the roof before sunset. That evening, Althea opened both western shutters while she cooked. No tactical reason, she wanted the light. Eskimenzen brought in firewood and stopped when he saw the windows open. He glanced toward the ridge, then at her. Althea waited for him to close them. He set the wood down instead. She cut onions on the scarred table. He ground coffee. The old hand grinder made a rough mechanical sound in the room. Still terrible, he asked. You haven't brewed it yet. It will be. Then yes. The first stars appeared through the open windows. Althea reached into her pocket for the locket, then changed her mind. She left it there. She no longer needed to check whether the past was still hers. It was. So was the rifle over the hearth. So were the scars in the door. So was the repaired gate. So was the name Althea. After supper they went outside. The 6 quartz stones glowed pale in the last light. Eskimenzen checked their positions and adjusted one. Althea leaned against the porch rail. You know, she said, if a quail moves those again, I'm not defending the valley. Then the quail will own it. Good. They can fix the fence. Eskimenzen sat on the porch step. Althea sat beside him. The northern ridge darkened, from copper to purple to black. For a while they listened. The spring. An insect in dry grass, a horse shifting in the corral, wind touching the new roof shingles. No alarms, no men, no promises spoken into the night. Althea rested her forearms on her knees. There would be danger again. Maybe Black. Maybe someone else. Fire. Drought, fever. A horse breaking a leg 30 miles from help. The territory did not become gentle because 2 wounded people had defended one piece of it. That was not what made the canyon home. Home was the bucket moved closer to the garden because it made work easier. A doctor's rude note pinned beside medicine. A rifle clean enough to trust but far enough away to rest. 6 stones moved each evening for the dead. A 7th object in a pocket for a girl named Elena who no longer needed rescuing from memory. A man beside her who did not ask what she owed him for water. A gate she had helped rebuild, and a road leading out that she knew she could take whenever she chose. Eskimenzen looked at her. You are counting. Althea realized she had been tapping 4 fingers against her knee. 1, 2, 3, 4. The old rhythm from the worst nights. The pattern that once kept her mind from breaking when men called her a number. She stopped, then she began again, slower. 1, the open window. 2, the repaired gate. 3, the Winchester above the hearth. 4, her own breath. The numbers were not a cage anymore. They were only numbers. She looked toward the ridge one final time. Nothing stood there but stone. Coffee tomorrow? Eskimenzen asked. Althea smiled. If I make it. No. You're afraid mine will be better. Yes, that may be the first sensible fear you've admitted. He gave her the faint, almost smile she had learned to recognize. A week later, clouds finally crossed the western rim with enough weight to mean something. All afternoon, the sky had been building itself into dark blue towers. The air changed before the light did. Heat still pressed against the yard, but beneath it came a smell Althea recognized from the first day she found the canyon. Creosote. Stronger now, green and sharp and almost sweet. She was sorting beans at the table when she smelled it through the open window. Rain, she said. Eskimenzen looked up from repairing a bridle. Maybe. That smell means rain. It means creosote expects rain. You ruin everything. He returned to the bridle. The first drop hit the roof 10 minutes later, a single heavy tap. Then another. Althea stood. Eskimenzen watched her cross the room and step onto the porch. Rain in Arizona did not arrive politely. Wind came first, throwing dust through the yard in twisting sheets. The repaired gate groaned on its hinges. Dry grass flattened. The horse turned its rump to the gusts. Then the sky opened. Water struck the roof hard enough to drown every small sound in the canyon. It ran from the new shingles in silver ropes and hammered the packed earth into dark mud. The smell of wet creosote rose so suddenly that Althea closed her eyes. For one breath, she was back at the mouth of the canyon with torn boots and a rifle she did not know how to trust. Only one breath. When she opened her eyes, the porch beneath her was the porch she had helped rebuild. The gate was the gate she had reset, the water barrel welling from the runoff channels they had cleared 2 days earlier. Inside, beans waited on the table and a rude doctor's note curled at one corner beside the medicine chest. Eskiminson came to the doorway. "You will get wet." Althea looked down at herself. Rain had already darkened her shirt and plastered hair to her cheeks. "Yes, you have fever. Had. You will have it again." Sterling left more quinine. "That is not permission." She stepped off the porch into the yard. Mud closed around the edges of her boots. Cold water ran down the back of her neck. She tilted her face upward. The sensation was so clean it almost hurt. For months, every time water touched her face, she had measured it. How much remained in the canteen? How far to the next spring? Whether the men guarding the barrel were watching. Whether she could wash blood from her lip without using enough to be punished. Now water fell from the sky faster than she could catch it. She laughed. Not the startled laugh from the sick room. Not the sharp one she used when Naishi irritated Eskiminson. A full laugh that left her bent slightly at the waist, with rain running from her chin. Eskiminson stood under the eave looking at her as if she had become another problem caused by weather. "Come inside," he said. "No, lightning." She looked at the dark sky. "That is a reasonable argument." A white line split the clouds beyond the ridge. Thunder followed so quickly the canyon walls shook. Althea ran back to the porch. Eskiminson moved aside to let her through. She stopped beside him, dripping onto the boards. "You smell that?" she asked. "Rain? Creosote?" "Both. When I arrived, you asked if I could smell it." "Yes. Why?" He looked out at the yard where water had begun to draw new channels in the dust. "To see if you were still noticing the world." Althea was quiet. "That was your test?" "One." "What were the others?" "You drank slowly. I knew better than to drink fast. You kept the rifle." "You told me I could. You watched my hands. I thought you might kill me. You noticed the door hinges." Althea turned it toward him. "You saw that?" "Yes. And after all those tests, you decided to let me stay?" Eskiminson shook his head. "I decided you were still deciding whether to live." Rain roared on the roof. Althea looked down at her wet hands. "And now?" "You complain about coffee." She stared at him. "That is your measure of recovery?" "It is one." She laughed again and went inside to find a dry shirt. The storm lasted less than an hour. By sunset, the clouds had moved east, leaving shallow pools between stones and water ticking from the eaves. The canyon walls turned deep red where rain had soaked them. Everywhere the desert smelled newly opened. Althea walked to the basalt slab. The 6 quartz stones were wet and bright. 2 had shifted under the rain. She set them back where Eskiminson kept them. Then she took the locket from her pocket and wiped rain from its surface. For the first time, she did not feel the urge to open it. She slipped it away and looked across the valley. The storm had erased many of the old tracks. Black's horse prints near the western rocks were gone. Cole's boot marks by the eastern wall were gone. Even Althea's own path from the cabin to the wash had softened into dark earth with no clear edge. She knew better than to call that forgetting. The land remembered in other ways. Broken stone, new cedar, scars on trees, a grave under stacked rocks. But tracks did not have to remain visible forever to prove a thing had happened. That thought brought a strange peace. When she returned to the porch, Eskiminson had brought out 2 tin mugs. Althea smelled the coffee and made a face. "Still terrible." "Yes." She took the mug anyway. They drank while steam rose from the wet ground, and the first stars appeared in the washed clean sky. Night settled into the canyon. Althea did not reach for the rifle. She did not check the road. She did not hide the locket. She sat beside Eskiminson until the stars filled the narrow strip of sky above them, and when the silence deepened, it did not feel like something waiting to swallow her. It felt occupied, not by ghosts, by work finished and work still waiting, by scars that had stopped being instructions, by the smell of cedar on their hands, by a gate standing straight in the dark, by 2 people who had been treated as property and had chosen, stubbornly and without ceremony, to become neighbors to the land and to each other. Althea had once thought freedom would feel like distance. Miles between herself and a camp, a horse beneath her, a horizon with no riders on it. She knew better now. Freedom was not the absence of anyone close enough to touch her life. It was the right to decide who could stay. She looked at the man beside her, then at the cabin, then at the open road beyond the gate. For the first time, none of them looked like a trap. She stayed because she wanted to.